Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and this is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. Each week we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. And have a number of slides I'm showing. This is one of them because I've just written a book titled Merrimack, the Resilient River. I have about 80 images that'll be in the book, and that'll be out in March. But I love to talk about the Merrimack River. It's one of the keys to the North Shore of Boston and also southern New Hampshire. So what we're going to do is talk about some of these scenes on the river and also how the river got cleaner. This is a photo from Franklin, New Hampshire. This is the start of the Merrimack River, and it is a combination of several small streams, but Franklin, New Hampshire is where the Merrimack River starts. Another shot of the start of the Merrimack River. It's 117 miles from Franklin, New Hampshire to Newburyport. I must say it's not very well marketed. I had to look around for a long time and ask people in pizza shops and gas stations where the start of the river was. But I finally found it. And this is what the start of the river in New Hampshire looks like. Of course, the river comes down for many miles. It comes through Manchester, New Hampshire, Concord, New Hampshire, Nashua, New Hampshire. Here's a shot in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Now, Lawrence is one of the communities that really was created because of the river. In about 1847, a group of developers and financiers realized that textile mills on the Merrimack River could be very profitable. They had started mills in Lowell, Massachusetts, about 15 miles upriver, and things were going well. So Lawrence, Massachusetts was created and planned solely to create the mills, then have housing, have stores, have schools, have churches. Lawrence has had some tough times since the 50s, but it is making somewhat of a comeback. And here you see a little of it. You see the old mills taking up most of the photo, and you see a parking garage on the left. And here the river is very shallow. You can see some of the weeds and some of the undergrowth, maybe 2 to 4 feet. Of course, there's a large falls in Merrimack, as there were in many communities, and that's why they put textile mills there. There are many beautiful spots on the Merrimack River. It's not just all urban canyons, as we just saw. This is in Methuen, and this is a boat ramp that people put in small fishing boats such as this one here. And one of the things that I learned from going up and down the river, and I did go from Franklin to Newburyport, is there are many beautiful spots still existing on the Merrimack River. And I think here's one of them. There are parts of Methuen that are quite built up, but there are other parts that are quite scenic, such as this one. And here again is Lawrence. This was one of the most famous clocks in the world at one time in the 19th century. It was reportedly the second largest clock in the world, next to Big Ben in London, just by a few feet. But this was built in the mid-19th century. And clocks such as this were very valuable because a lot of people in those days did not have watches. They were low-paid factory workers, did not have watches, perhaps did not have clocks in their houses. But here is an example of a clock that everybody could see. And is well known in mill communities. People would watch it to see what time it was, when their shift started, when their shift ended. So clocks were a big deal in the 19th century. And again, this shows Lawrence does have a bit of a tarnished name because they've had some difficult times. It is improving, but this is a beautiful shot of Lawrence. In fact, it's managing to support some Canada geese. And here's in the background, you can see to the right, kind of a steeple from the old mill days, and to the left, more of a modern approach, and that is a communications tower. And Lawrence is improving, as many communities are. This is a wonderful shot from Cashman Park in Newburyport. I think it shows you the river has cleaned up significantly in the past several decades, and there are close to 1,500 vessels are moored or in the river, or they're in slips along the Merrimack. And these are some of them this summer. Behind the vessels here is the marsh, and this is a tremendous asset for the river and for the North Shore. It's 25,000 square acres. It's the largest marsh in New England and the largest north of New Jersey. And it really supports birds, fish, wildlife of all kinds. So those on the North Shore are very fortunate that this marsh is vibrant, and thus far it is free of most development. Cashman Park, by the way, in Newburyport, is the busiest state park in terms of launching vessels. When people go fishing, or people truck in their boat that, just to go up the river or into the ocean, Cashman Park is the busiest launch in the state. When we talk about a clean river, there's a lot of political lore that goes with it. It's hard to believe but before 1970, there was basically no environmental movement, and there was very little legislation that was calling for clean rivers. In 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire. Some of you might remember that. It was, the very famous shot was in newspapers and on television at the time. And people said, gosh, how could a river get so polluted as to catch fire? But in 1970, as a result of this, Richard Nixon's administration created the Environmental Protection Agency. 2 years later, Edmund Muskie, a Democratic senator from Maine, was the lead legislator on passing the Clean Water Act. And here is Muskie right here. He grew up in Rumford, Maine, on the Androscoggin River, which was quite polluted, and knew a lot about pollution. And he was able to get a bipartisan group, Democrats and Republicans on both sides in the House and the Senate, together to create an agency that would put some money into cleaner rivers and lakes and the ocean. And so the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. And everybody will tell you that this was the start of cleaner rivers, especially at the Merrimack River. I might say that President Nixon, who does get credit for approving the EPA, vetoed the Clean Water Act in 1972, but it was passed over his veto. Now, Nixon, of course, turned out to be a rogue as far as Watergate went, as far as hopping on a plane before he went to impeachment trial. But it was his administration that got the EPA going. And I must say that Attorney General John Mitchell, also a rogue from Watergate, was the Attorney General responsible for filing the first suit on water pollution in Ohio against polluters of the Cuyahoga River. And so John Mitchell and Richard Nixon were really champions of the EPA. A little counterintuitive, I must say, but this was Richard Nixon was the head of did start the EPA, and Ed Muskie pushed it through. Muskie's wife, Jane, is off to the left there, right behind his shoulder. Of course, the clean river has been a boon for many people along the Merrimack. And here's a beautiful photo of the bridge over the Merrimack is opening to let larger ships with masts go through. The sun is setting. And this picture by Dan Grovac, who is the chairman of the board of directors of the Merrimack River Watershed Council, took this photo. He's a great photographer, as you can see. Again, the Merrimack River, is such an asset in this area. And here you can see some of the challenges of the river in terms of boating. It's very narrow, as you can see. It's shallow, 12 to 16 feet draw of the water. I mean, that's how far the boat would have to go before it hits the sand. And so vessels over the years have had a difficult time in coming in. And here you can see a sandbar in the center left of your photo. So that's even shallower. So it's a situation where frequently boaters who are not familiar with the river or have not called ahead and asked the harbor master any special instructions frequently come up on that sandbar at low tide. And it happens every summer, numerous times. The jetties were rebuilt, between 2013 and 2016, $10 million for each jetty. That's $20 million. And it was federal money. And the Army Corps of Engineers supervised it. Their reason was they wanted better navigation. They felt that creating the jetties would keep some random sand out of there. It would keep the sand flowing out through the river into the ocean and would make the entrance a little deeper. But that's under dispute whether that's ever been successful, I must say. But this is an example. It's very beautiful, as you can see. That's a Preservation Terrace is to the right, and Salisbury is to the left. Now, here are three of the champions of the EPA anyway. I bet you haven't seen a picture of Richard Nixon recently. He's on the left, Hubert Humphrey's in the center, and Ed Muskie's on the right. And I love this picture because, as I kind of just mentioned, I hadn't seen Nixon in quite a long time. But these were some of the movers in that time. Nixon was responsible for creating the EPA. Hubert Humphrey was a powerful Democrat at the time, and Ed Muskie, as we have discussed, not only was a supporter of the EPA, but was the author of the act, the Clean Water Act, which changed everything in 1972. Another person who really helped clean rivers in the Merrimack River was Senator George Mitchell, also of Maine. And he was from Waterville, Maine, along the Kennebec River, which, like the Androscoggin, is very polluted. But he also was really worked for clean water, for clean air, and was a champion in that regard. The reason we focus on him here was in 1987, when President Ronald Reagan was in office, Reagan wanted to basically stop grants to communities for sewage treatment plants. He said the EPA was kind of a waste of money and he didn't want to give any more grants. But Mitchell, who was a powerful senator at the time, led a group which created some amendments. Now, it stopped Reagan's plan to get rid of the EPA. Reagan was successful in putting an end to grants. That's where you get 95% of the money and the community only has to pay about 5%. Mitchell's proposal, which passed with bipartisan support, permitted low interest loans. So these were the amendments of 1987. They're very important, and they're important even today because the Merrimack River is now seeking federal money for communities like Haverhill, Lawrence, Lowell, Manchester, New Hampshire. They need money to help them improve their treatment plants. Right now, all water runoff from a big storm will go into the sewage treatment plant along with the sewage. And when there's too much liquid there, the sewage treatment plant has to release everything. And there's a lot of effluent that goes in with the rainwater. And they say 700 million gallons go in each year. That's an enormous amount. It's hard for me to even think of. But anyway, the point is, most legislators in the North Shore are seeking low interest loans, which Mitchell helped to create, so that communities can improve their sewage treatment plants. This is a beautiful shot in New Hampshire. It just shows how beautiful the river can be. And it's an example this is just below Franklin, New Hampshire. There's whitewater, there's, beautiful forests. There's just a wonderful scene to be had. And so this is an example of what the Merrimack looks farther north. You never know what you're going to find along the Merrimack River, I must say. So here's the situation where this group called the Voyagers took a trip last summer down the Merrimack from Franklin, New Hampshire to Newburyport in an effort to generate interest in the river and also to express the concerns that it's getting dirtier rather than cleaner, and it needs more community support to clean it up. So this is a Voyager. This is Senator Diana DiZoglio. She's a Democrat from Methuen. She was one of the 12 or 15 Voyagers who paddled for 4 days and slept 4 nights on either the shore or in a tenting area. So here they are in New Hampshire. They rounded the curve, and this herd of cattle came out. Obviously, they were getting a drink, and obviously it was quite a surprise. So this is a wonderful photo, again, by Dan Grovnick. But this catches these unusual sights that can come up on the Merrimack River. I would also mention that pollution and residue from farms is a pollutant to the Merrimack River. That's a tough one, though. And we're trying to save our farms. They use pesticides. Of course, herds of cattle create effluent as well. Agricultural runoff is a tough one. But here you can see a surprise for the Voyagers. Again, 117 miles in 4 days. This is a entry point in New Hampshire, a beautiful spot. And again, New Hampshire is quite wild. I wouldn't call it wild, but it's not too much built up. And at that part of the river anyway, there weren't too many mills. This is a beautiful spot in Amesbury. It's the Hatters Point, a condo center. They did a beautiful job with that old mill. I don't know if you know it, but it's just past Alliance Park in Amesbury. And for years, it looked like it was going to be a disaster. It was an old hat mill, of course. But in recent years, it was finished, it was fixed up, and they did, I think, a great job. And here are some vessels along the river. Behind them is Maudsley State Park, which is a great resource. It's about 450 acres. It was purchased by the state 3 or 4 decades ago. In 1985, the city and the state got together and they made Maudsley into a state park enjoyed by many people. And if you haven't been there, they don't have boats there, I must point out. But, it's great for hiking, great for foliage in the fall and beautiful bushes in the spring. They have an art in the park in the summer. And so Maudsley State Park, which does have about 100 parking spots, is really an asset. And there are beautiful views of the river at Maudsley. Here's a wonderful shot of the valley, the Merrimack Valley. And several years ago, the American Rivers Association, which is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., issued an annual report. And the Merrimack was put on a list of the 10 most endangered rivers in the country. Now, one of their concerns was CSOs, which we have just mentioned, combined sewage overflows. But another was, in the report, it said that increased development is putting pressure on the river. It creates more pavement, more oil and gas runoff, more companies that put waste, perhaps treated waste, but nevertheless waste, into the river. And so here's a picture, a beautiful shot of how the river looks from the air. You can see the development in many parts of the river. And I believe this is in Haverhill looking towards Amesbury. And this is just shows you how it dominates parts of the river and also how much development is going on. Here's a beautiful shot. This is down by Plum Island, actually. It's taken at sunset. Dan Grovac took this as well, just showing you how beautiful the river can be and, you know, why it has to be preserved. Incidentally, if you're just listening, this is Life Along the Merrimack, a weekly podcast. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. We talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. And I think we're all boosters of the river. And I think this is one reason why. The beauty is quite immense. And this is a fine photo by Dan Grovac. This is Manchester, New Hampshire. And in order for communities to have become mill cities in the 19th century, you had to have a good drop and you had to have a good dam that could capture the water and develop hydropower, which would be translated first into the mills, the textile mills, and also hydroelectricity. And here's an example. I think you can see in Manchester, New Hampshire, the electric works is behind the dam. This is still very much a source of energy here in the Merrimack Valley. In fact, there are dozens of hydropower plants still in the river, still generating electricity. And they're definitely part of the reason the Merrimack Valley hums along and has enough electricity. So that is one thing that remains. Another element that remains about the Merrimack River is close to 500,000 people still get their drinking water from the river. Now that is a large number. And some communities, such as Newburyport, where I live, get their drinking water from elsewhere. The Artichoke and several other reservoirs are what give Newburyport their water, but 500,000 people, including people in North Andover, Lawrence, and Haverhill, get their drinking water from the river. Now, of course, it's scientifically purified. It's all, reportedly very good. But as a general idea, I think we would all like to think the water has to be as clean as it can. And so, there are ongoing efforts to do that. But if you ever wonder, gee, why do we have to keep the river clean? Well, in part because 500,000 people still drink from it. Here's Cashman Park. You can see the little transport vessels in the foreground. You can see some of the elements of the park behind. There's the boat launch. And as I said, this is the busiest boat launch, the busiest state-owned boat launch in Massachusetts. And here's a good picture of the Voyagers, about a dozen of them here. This is when they're going through Haverhill. Again, this was in August of 2019. About a dozen or 15 went down the river from Franklin, New Hampshire. Some of them were there for all 4 days, and I do list them in my book. Others, such as Mayor Donna Holliday of Newburyport, was on 1 or 2 legs, didn't have time to do the whole thing. But they, together they went down the river, and it was quite a big event. Created a lot of publicity, which is good. It looks like they did not stop in at this McDonald's, but they could have. Here is one of the champions of raising money for the river. Lori Trahan is a congresswoman from the Lowell area. She is working hard to get low interest loans for communities. And she speaks around, and I've heard her speak several times, and she says, in Washington, I'm known as the sewage lady. because I'm always talking about the need for money to improve sewage treatment plants. Excuse me. Here is Senator Zoglio. She was speaking at New England, Northern Essex Community College, and she has been a leader in raising money and organizing people to improve the river. She started a group called the Merrimack River Commission. It's state funded, and it has enabled several workshops such as this one, so that public officials, some are elected officials, some are, say, the head of the Lowell sewage treatment plant spoke. Very scientific, but nevertheless. So they're trying to create a significant consciousness about the need to keep the river clean. This is Mayor Donna Holliday of Newburyport. She has put a lot of work in on cleaning the Merrimack River at the bottom end. Newburyport put in millions of dollars in recent years to improve its sewage treatment plant. And she also is often to say, you know, she kind of chides some other political leaders in Haverhill and Lawrence and whatever. And she, you know, we're at the end of the line. When you have your CSOs, when you release your sewage in Newburyport and Amesbury and Salisbury, we're the ones who get it. So anyway, she's been a very key leader in improving the river. And here are some of the remarkable voyagers who I've mentioned a few times. Senator DiZoglio is on the left. State Rep Jim Kelkhorst is in the center. On the far right is Doug Sparks. He's the editor of Merrimack River magazine. And so these, I've listed them all in my book. I'll put them on my website as well, my blog. But this is, you know, where they're just finishing, and it's really remarkable event they did, 117 miles, and they were pretty happy to get near the end. Here in, this wasn't my best photo. This is my my artistry, if you can call it that. This is an area where they have a fishway. They try to help the fish get upstream. It doesn't work very well, but they try to, you know, there is an ongoing effort to help the fish up there, but this is in Manchester. You can stop here, you can portage here, you can learn more about the fish, learn more about the region. But it was kind of unusual. So here is the voyagers starting out one morning. These are the kayaks. You can just begin seeing a few of the people coming down. And here's what we think about when we think about runoff. This is in Newburyport, beautiful flowers, that's the boardwalk, but here's a runoff going straight into the river. Now, again, that's rain, that's not sewage. This is in Methuen. This is another site that we're not very happy with, but this is what happens when areas are not pleased, but everyone's trying to improve things. So that's the end of what I'm doing today. That's me, Dyke Hendrickson, the author. And my book is Merrimack, the Resilient River. I'm sending it all in this week, by the way, 35,000 words, 80 photos. You've seen some of them. I'll show more next week. But thank you very much for being with us. We talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. And this, again, is Life Along the Merrimack. Thank you for being with us. And we'll be here next Tuesday again, and we'll look forward to being with you. See you next time.